In the 1950s, I was a high school student. And so today I'm going to tell you about predictions of the future that were common in those days. Now, of course, there was no unanimity of opinion. There wasn't then, and there isn't now, and there probably never will be, as to what the future would bring and what the future would be. But I'm going to tell you that I used to read a magazine called Popular Mechanics. And these days I read, I read something in the internet called New Atlas. And New Atlas is kind of the same idea. It has new inventions and people talking about what's going to happen in the future. You have to remember that there's no unanimity of opinion. Some people think one thing will happen and others think other things will happen. But here's the way it was in the 50s. Well, the funniest thing was cigarettes were portrayed in ads as healthy. Crazy, huh? In spite of common sense, they smoked and they had cigarette cough. Yet other people called cigarettes coffin nails. And I remember a pretty girl from my high school class who was a big smoker. And I said, you know, smoking costs money. It makes your fingers yellow. It gives you bad breath. Why the hell do you smoke? And she says, oh, it gives me something to do with my hands. Well, I could have given her something else to do with her hands, but we won't talk about that on YouTube. Okay, so let me tell you what people thought about. I'm going to give you some predictions from Popular Mechanics. One of them was that there would be 3D flat screens for your TV that you would put on the wall. Very funny, because in those days we had 3-inch screens. They were called cathode ray tubes. Now they grew pretty fast, and I remember by the time I finished school, you could have a so-called Movie Clear TV from Sylvania with a flat 16-inch screen. But that was very luxurious. I think that cost probably the equivalent of $5,000 today. It was maybe 500, but you got to add at least 1 zero. Okay. So in terms of inventions, that was one thing that was going to happen that, well, it really did. We do have, maybe they're not 3D, but we do have very nice big clear screens you put on the wall, and they're almost 3D. But how about what people thought government would be? Now this is a little bit interesting, because I'd say the majority of people thought that we're going to have a worldwide socialism and the death of the state. In other words, there wasn't going to be so many individual states anymore. Borders were going to be eliminated. And, well, guess what? The EU and Mercosur, EU in Europe and Mercosur in South America, did eliminate borders, and so to a certain extent that dream came to pass. But the rest of the dream, socialism, that was a little bit, well, we called it in those days utopian, because people thought, hey, there's not going to be any crime anymore because there's not going to be any private property. People will be so prosperous that you can have whatever you want, you can go wherever you want, eat whatever you want, and there won't be any need for private property. And so there's no crime of robberies or burglaries or anything like that. But the funny one was no disputes about sex. You know, one of the big causes of murders is jealousy and things like that. But no, this isn't going to happen because of free love. This was before the pill. And actually, for a little period of time, when the pill came along 10 years later, there was actually a period of free love. But did that stop jealousy? No way. But I'm talking about what people thought might happen in the future as of 1950. So there was going to be no need for mothers giving a painful childbirth, because we're going to have test tube babies. That meant that I guess eggs and sperm are going to be put in a tube, and the babies are going to come out later, and no pain. And that was there was a book about that called Brave New World, very popular, about all the future predictions. Now, there were negative views. There were views like the computers, which were very much in their infancy then, would take over the world. And that was in the year when the movie 2001 came out a bit later. That was HAL, which was IBM, one letter later, HAL. Those computers were going to take over the world. But on the positive side, in the future, everybody was going to have a life of leisure. There's going to be property for everybody. Nobody has to work, but if you want to work, you'll be sort of a technician. And so there'll be technicians, and there'll be, I don't know if you'd call them lazy people. They were just people who'd pursue their hobbies. Wow, wasn't that nice? And how about farmers? Because farming was always a kind of a hard work. Nope. Farms would be automated. Now, nobody thought about animals' rights in those days. So when you thought about chickens, you're going to have 1 million chickens all in little jail cells. And the chickens are going to be fed, and they're going to come out and be automatically slaughtered. And nobody thought about chicken welfare in those days, but there was plenty of chickens, and the slogan was, "A chicken in every pot." Wow. So the world was either going to be a utopia, that means something, everybody's happy and everybody's perfect, no crime, no war. That was another thing. People in the 50s thought that with the atomic bomb, there was something called MAD, mutually assured destruction. So why should there ever be a war? If everybody is going to die in the next war, it's going to be like eternal peace. Haha, that never came, did it? So the dream was nobody would go to war. The states would wither. There would always be communities, but they'd be kind of autonomous with peace. Oh, and then as to religion, well, a lot of people felt that God was finally going to be dead. Nobody is going to believe in God, and religion will gradually fade out along with state governments. And well, that never happened, although we did visit Czechoslovakia, and apparently the legacy in Czechoslovakia is that almost everybody in Czechoslovakia is an atheist. So there's very few active churchgoers in Czechoslovakia. But as to the rest of the world, seems to be they've got, well, all the atheists in Russia have become staunch Christian, what is that? Orthodox religions. And so the Orthodox religions have made a big comeback. I noticed there doesn't seem to be any correlation between intelligence and religion. You can find an awful lot of very intelligent people who are very religious, and well, you don't find too many really dumb people who are atheists. But that's my personal opinion, so I don't want to go into too much of that. Okay, some of the things that were supposed to happen. A cancer cure. They were looking for cancer cures in 1950s, and I remember one was eat apricot pits, and that was supposed to cure cancer. And also, still today, eat a lot of broccoli and you won't get cancer. But progress has been made, but I think a full cancer cure is far away. Also, in those days, they thought of cancer as one disease. These days, they think that there's all kinds of cancer variations. Now, in the early 50s, there hadn't been any Sputnik, and the Russians were actually the first in space. But people did realize that the rocket ships that had been invented in Germany, called V2 and V1 rockets, had the potential to take us to outer space. And so one of the predictions for the year 2000, that was of course 50 years in the future, would be that there would be colonies on the moon. And the reason there'd be colonies on the moon was that even then people realized that the escape velocity for a rocket coming from the Earth was a lot more. You needed a lot more energy to get away from the Earth than to get away from the moon. And so the moon was envisioned as a place where rocket ships would be taking people. Nobody thought about all these unmanned rockets that we have today, but people thought about people, physical people, going to all the other planets and even other galaxies. But obviously, well, you know what happened. I don't have to tell you. Now, one of the interesting inventions that never did happen was people thought about nuclear fusion. You know, the atomic bomb had wreaked a lot of destruction, and atomic energy was in its infancy, and people thought there'd be something like a little black box where atoms would be split and they could run your car and they could heat your house and there'd be unlimited, very cheap energy. Well, that never happened. And for our final prediction, well, one of the funnier predictions about was about transport. People transport, cars. Before the cars were powered by atomic energy, everybody thought that jet engines would power cars, and highways would be sort of like tubes, and you'd press a button and your jet engine would accelerate you to the speed of sound, and you'd go somewhere in your car. and this was anticipated by putting fins on cars. So the Cadillacs, the Plymouths, every car for a few years had fins that were supposed to be the advance of coming rocket-powered cars. Well, that never happened. The other thing that was going to happen was cities were going to have huge towers, and in between the towers was going to be sort of automated, not stairways, but passages where you stood on the passage and you went from one building to another in the cities. And guess what? Saudi Arabia has just started construction on something that was envisioned in the 50s. We can wait to see whether that'll ever happen. It's called Neon, a new city where if you want to go from one end to the other, you just kind of get on a moving platform, and you can go 10 or 20 miles pretty quickly. Well, that was the way we viewed the future in the 1950s. And that's it.